G'day guys and welcome back to a new episode of the Boundary Riders Podcast. We're up to episode 17 now, I believe, and we just completed round 15 of the AFL season. Of course, this was the last round of the buys, and now we're in the final end of the AFL season, really bounding up to be a pretty close finish in the end, especially from that middle table with a lot of teams winning this weekend that were in the middle and a lot of teams that were higher up actually losing. So it'll be very interesting to see how the final 8 shapes up in the next probably month or so, because I think that's when it's going to start to really shape up who's going to make the 8 and who's going to miss out. But today, what I wanted to talk about first, and if you can see in the background, you would probably know that I'm a Swan supporter, or if you've been on the channel for a bit now, you would know. And I want to talk about the West Coast Sydney game, because that was an atrocious game of footy. And watching West Coast come out to that game, and watching Sydney, Witches Hats isn't even the start of the extent of how poor West Coast were in that game. It was basically shown from the first 5 minutes that the West Coast Eagles were not up for the game. They weren't ready for the game. And I think that you can't just blame Adam Simpson for this. This is just... I think that he'll get sacked, and I think I don't know if he'll last throughout the season. I think now, if they weren't going to sack him like in the last few games when they've lost, 4 of their past 8 games by over 100 points. I don't think they're going to sack him until maybe the last couple of rounds of the season, maybe, or maybe they'll just wait till the end, but I don't think he makes it through this, and I don't think anyone else thinks he will. But nonetheless, I think that the senior players of West Coast have to take the blame for this as well. Andrew Gaff, not so much Luke Shuey and Elliot Yeo, I think they were pretty good on the weekend. Well, pretty good for an extent. I think Shuey was probably the only player on the ground who could somewhat hold his head up high. And that's even minimally, because he was the captain. But, we've got Tim Kelly, Elliot Yeo, Andrew Gaff, Tom Barras even to an extent. Sam Petreski-Seaton, I would almost say. I know he was a bit injured in that game, but he's also one. Jack Darling as well. There weren't a lot of other... And I know they do have a lot of injuries. But all those players that I mentioned there, plus the few that, were playing in that game that I probably forgot... They should all be ashamed of themselves how they played that game. It was an atrocious game of footy from them. They didn't want to show any sort of fight for the jumper, and Sydney and West Coast have had a great rivalry over the years, and that just sullied all of that great rivalry that they've once had, because that was an atrocious game of footy from West Coast. I know I've said that so many times, and I could maybe even somewhat repeat myself, but that was terrible from the West Coast Eagles. As a Swan supporter watching that game, I'm sure there may be a few people saying that it was great to see Sydney win. That wasn't good to watch. That wasn't a good game of footy at all. I wasn't impressed by Sydney winning that game, but too much, to be honest. I don't think Sydney will make the 8. I know that the one thing that Sydney got out of it, which is good for them, is that they got percentage from it. I think they got 15%. But, if Sydney, of all teams, can get a 170-point win... Who's to say that won't happen for the rest of the season? I honestly think that this may be the first time the AFL needs to step in and do something for the West Coast Eagles. Honestly, you obviously can't take the team out of the AFL because that just ruins everyone else. But at this rate, they might as well have had the mercy rule in, like you did as like an 8-year-old in the grasshoppers of footy. That was an atrocious performance from West Coast, and I also think it's pretty bullshit of the players to not have stood with Adam Simpson at the press conference if it was Luke Shuey or someone like that. I know that Adam Simpson's probably wanting there to stand up for his players, but that was woeful game of footy. 200 points City scored. They won by their equal best margin in Swans history, and it was the 4th best win in AFL history as well. You can't stand for that at all. I'm surprised that heads haven't rolled this week, to be fair. I think that... I don't know what they're waiting for. Is it a 180-point loss? I don't know. They have St Kilda this week at home. We'll talk about that a little bit later, like the tips and that, but they're in for a very rough rest of the season, and it's really making it unfair for the rest of the AFL, because I think that a lot of people have mentioned this as well. There's been 15 teams this season, and then there's been 3 down the bottom: Hawthorn, North Melbourne, and West Coast. Now it's like there's 15 teams, then there's then there's Hawthorn and North Melbourne, and then West Coast is just so far down that they're not even. I don't even know if they'd be winning many games if they had this team that they played against the Swans against any VFL team or even in the Waffle. I don't even know if they would have won a game in the Waffle with that team if they performed like that. That was terrible footy. Sydney were playing against a country football team. And that's disrespectful to country football teams. That was they weren't moving the football. They weren't tackling. The amount of times that players would just miss tackle and would let. I think it was the best example was I think it was late first quarter, early second quarter when Nick Blakey had the ball at halfback, and Sam Petruski-Seaton came from behind. I don't think he was injured at this stage. Maybe he was, but I don't think he was. And he got tackled. Everyone was like, he's going to get it. Like, you could see him coming. He was going to grab him, pin him holding the ball, and it was going to be a free kick for West Coast. And he completely missed the tackle. He hit his, he threw himself at him like he was tackling, but it wasn't a tackle there. There's a difference between a tackle and what the hell that was. That was a shocker. And you just know at that point, I knew the Swans were going to win that. I pretty much knew they were going to win the game no matter what. But that point there, you're like, oh, this is going to be a bad, bad loss for West Coast. And we already saw them lose by 120 points against the Crows before the bye. You'd think maybe after the bye they'd be a little bit, wanting to try and bounce back. And I know a lot of teams have lost off the bye, but yeah, there's no excuse for that. And if I'm a West Coast member right now, I'd almost be asking for a refund because, you're paying good money for an AFL membership these days. And for your club to not even show any sort of respect for that. When this team won a premiership, 5 years ago? This team won a premiership in 2018. And now they're just the worst team in the AFL by a long way. And this also brings the question of footy in WA. Because West Coast are the biggest team in WA. And obviously their second is Fremantle. And Fremantle aren't performing that well at the moment. But because West Coast is doing so poorly, Fremantle are kind of going under the radar. And this is what happened probably a few years ago when Port Adelaide were down with the Crows. And there was a lot of talk about South Australian footy, where's it going to go from here? Because, they're playing so poor football. And I think the question has to be asked about WA football. I don't think Fremantle are in a bad spot, to be fair. I think they're in a pretty good spot. They still could make finals this year. But if you're the biggest club, one of the biggest clubs in the AFL and West Coast Eagles are playing this poorly, this is like the extent of Collingwood playing this bad. There would be so much talk if this was Collingwood. I think that there should be more talk about how the club is because West Coast have always had a culture as well of pretty arrogant as well. We saw it in 2006 when they won the premiership. In 2007 they dropped. We saw all the drug scandals come out. In 2018 they won the grand final, and since then I think they made the finals twice and only just made the finals. So I think it begs the question of culture as well, not just coach. It's not just as simple as changing a coach or getting a couple of players in. This is a whole rebuild throughout the whole entire club. And I am just really disappointed to see a team play this poorly. And we saw how, I think it was also mentioned in the broadcast, how we saw Melbourne were the last team to concede 200 points against Geelong. And that game is still talked about 11 years later. It was the resurrection story of Melbourne a couple of years ago when they won their first grand final in 50 years or whatever. They went back to that day, and that was one of the big turning points in the whole club. And that's when they brought in things like Paul Roos and got Simon Goodwin ready to go to then he take over the job. And it's almost got to that point now where they have to do that, West Coast, because this is not going to be a quick fix. They've got a couple of decent players, young kids like Jimby and Hewitt, who looked okay. And Oscar Allen, of course, as well. But I think it needs to be a whole clean out. I mean, if I'm looking at the club right now, if West Coast should be asking the question right now of all their players, are you ready to rebuild? If you're not, we're going to get rid of you. It was also mentioned, I think, on the Sunday Footy Show on Channel 9, out of the top 100 players in the AFL, highest paid players, 7 of them are from West Coast. No one in that team right now deserves to be in the top 100 paid players. No one. I don't even think they deserve to be in the top 200. If I had to pick a player who's worth the most amount of money in that club, right now, I'd probably say it's Luke Shuey. So, yeah. Luke Shuey right now is probably the best, and I mean he should be, he's the captain. And I know they have a lot of injury lists, but they've had that for a good 3 years now. You can't blame the injuries, in my opinion, anymore, because it's just been woeful. Nick Natanui, I think honestly, any of those ones on the injury list who have been on there long term, they should just get rid. More than happy to get rid of and get draft picks. Nick Natanui, I'd probably say go. Shannon Hearn, I think he needs to retire. I know he's been a great servant of the club, but I think he needs to go. Andrew Gaff, I think, should go. Jamie Cripps, I think, could almost go as well. Jack Darling needs to go. They need to be getting rid of these players and actually rebuilding. And Tim Kelly needs to lift. I don't think he should go, but he needs to lift because Dom Sheed need to lift for the club. Ever since that, I think Dom Sheed's definitely still living off the days of the grand final kick. And yes, it was a great kick, dude. You won a premiership for your club, but it's 5 years down the track. I mean, you could you could have the best day of work ever, but if you work as a forklift driver and crash into shit every single day for 5 years after that, you're not a good forklift driver. You just had one good day. And I know that obviously you had a great day. You won the premiership for your club. But now you got to lift for your club. You got to lift for your team now. You got to lift for the members of your club, the jumper, the history of the West Coast Eagles. It's a proud club and they're getting shit on at the moment. But nonetheless, other than that, the round was a pretty lackluster one, if I'm going to be honest. We didn't see a lot of close games, except until we got to Sunday afternoon with Collingwood versus Adelaide, probably one of the games of the year. These guys seem like they're building a real rivalry. I think the past 3 games that they've played now have been under a goal. So it looks like they're building up a real rivalry. We also saw Geelong caught back in the last quarter and play well. Gold Coast bounced back from their pretty big loss as well as Fremantle. And now I think what we'll do, we'll go into the weekly votes for the week. So as you know on the channel, we do a review of the round basically, where we go through like the votes for every single game of like 3, 2, 1 basically, of the best players in the game. Now this is not just a midfielders award like you'd see at the Brownlow. Like I think every couple of weeks we usually give a defender a 1 vote or 2 vote. Like last week I think we gave Harry Cunningham 1 vote. For the Swans over Brisbane because he kept Charlie Cameron to 7 disposals, no goals. We've given Jackson Payne for Brisbane a vote in the past, I know, and many others as well. Just off, having a little bit more influence on the game and playing like well for your team. So that's why a lot of them may not be the Brownlow medal votes, but it's more important because I made them. But nonetheless, we get to the first game of round 15, which was Geelong versus Melbourne. This was a good game from Geelong. Now, they didn't start off the best, and to be honest, it was a pretty big arm wrestle until about 3/4 time. Obviously, Gary Rowan accidentally knocked out his teammate in Jeremy Cameron, and it's great to see that he's okay at the moment. He'll miss the game against the Swans this week, but he should be back for the week after, so that's really good. And speaking of Gary Rowan, he was big in this game. So he was really, really good, and I was really impressed because you know how Gary Rowan can be. He's definitely one of the lowest disposal getters on the ground, but he's probably the best player on in a game that has the lowest amount of disposals. It shows that really a lot of players who don't have many disposals in games can still have a massive impact, and he's that in spades. So the 3-2-1 votes for this one, I gave the 3 votes to Gary Rowan, the 2 votes to Mitch Duncan, and the 1 vote to Tom Atkins. Now, the reason why I gave the 1 vote to Tom Atkins, and my brother, Jackpot Junkies, was watching this game as well, and he agreed with me, that Tom Atkins, in the 3 of the 4 quarters that he played on Christian Petrarca, I know Christian Petrarca had the most disposals on the ground and had the most fantasy points, but he was well held, especially in clearance, by Tom Atkins. He could not get any real effective disposal out of the clearance as Christian Petrarca, and Atkins played a massive game. I think that he's actually the future of the Geelong midfield, along with like Tanner Bruin, who we saw in that game, was really good as well, and Max Holmes. I think that Atkins needs to lead this team in the midfield. He was big in this game. He's one of the best defensive runners now, with Tuke Miller and the likes like that. He is a really good defensive runner as a midfielder, and I think it's very underrated. So we gave him the 1 vote. After that, we get to St Kilda Brisbane. St Kilda, it's very disappointing that they didn't win this game. I know Brisbane have a pretty okay record at Marvel, but away from home, they aren't the best. And this is a real chance for St Kilda to solidify their spot in the top 8, and now they're really in touch with that middle range of the ladder now. They do have a win in hand, I believe. I think they're 36 points on the ladder, so they're not right there yet. But if they lose a couple of games in a row, they're in threat of losing the top 8 spot. But all credit to Brisbane. They were massive in this game. And the 3 votes, I gave the 3 votes to Harris Andrews, 2 votes to Jack Sinclair, and the 1 vote to Jackson Payne. Now, Harris Andrews is massive, especially in the first half for Brisbane, playing as the intercept defender, and he was really, really good. And I think he's going to play that position a lot more now because of the one vote play that I gave was Jackson Payne. Because this guy is one of the best defenders in the comp at the moment, one of the best lockdown defenders. He kept Max King to no goals, no marks. That was just amazing from Jackson Payne. To keep probably one of the more informed forwards this month or so. He kept him to no goals and no marks. That is a wonderful game from him. And it also just makes Brisbane's defence look a lot better because Harris Andrews doesn't have to play on the most influential forward anymore. He can play as that intercept player, which Jake Lever can do for Melbourne, or Aliria is good at for the Port Adelaide. So that's a really big plus for Brisbane. It gives them a chance now that they can actually push for that top 4 spot and possibly top 2, although I think it may be a little bit out of reach for them now. But they're going to be very hard to beat at the Gabba if they can be beaten at all. They're just going to have problems away from home. And if Jack Payne can take that spot and take it in spades, which he shows that he can, I think Brisbane are a real chance later on in the season. After that, we get to Sydney versus West Coast. Look, I'm not going to spend much time on this one because we did talk about it at the start of the podcast. But Sydney, look, they had 50 scoring shots. They took the kill that was there and they took it in spades. I have to give Sydney a little bit of credit because we've seen teams play games against maybe the West Coast or even Port Adelaide maybe was probably a good example earlier in the year against Hawthorn when they should have taken the advantage and drilled home a massive win and get percentage. And Sydney did that. But West Coast gave no fight whatsoever. But nonetheless, the 3 votes I gave to Isaac Heaney, 2 votes to Errol Goulden, and the 1 vote to Chad Warner. Isaac Heaney was massive in this game. He kicked 5 goals, 3. He had 18 score involvements, and this may be something that can kickstart his season. We know his season has been a bit poor so far this year. He definitely hasn't met the heights that he had 12 months ago. But finally, he had a good game of footy, and I think Isaac Heaney was the best player on the ground. But I do believe at the end of the game, they gave away a medal. I stopped watching at this point. I don't know who else could have watched it. But Errol Goulden did get the player of the match. I think Errol Goulden was very, very good. I just thought that Heaney was a little bit better. And Chad Warner was pretty much as good as he has been all season. I think he's been probably one of Sydney's best. I do think that he needs to find that find that consistency. Because I think sometimes when he's not playing well, he plays really poorly. And when he plays when he gets to that form, he's one of the best in the comp. So if he can find that middle ground, I think he'll find that in the next few years. I think he could be one of the top midfielders in the game. Next up, we get to Fremantle versus Essendon. And Fremantle, after a really poor game against the Giants, they came out at home and they beat Essendon. And I do think that this was kind of coming for Essendon. They're not very good over in Perth. In fact, the game they played against West Coast this year, when they won by 50 points, is one of their best wins ever in Perth. So they're not very good over there. And in the first quarter, though, it looked like Essendon really had the game going their way. But then they just fell away and Fremantle just lifted to another gear. And led by, in the middle, Brayshaw, Sarong, and even Fife went through there a lot of the night. They're definitely building something there. And I don't know if maybe they were a year too early last year or a couple of years too early, because I don't know if they'll make the 8 this year now, because they've been a little bit inconsistent in 2023. But I do think that they could make a bit of a run towards finals, and if they can win those games at home and then pinch a couple of games away, I do think that they have a chance, Fremantle. But nonetheless, the 3 votes I gave to Liam Ryan. He was massive in this game with, I think, 16 or 17 marks. We had Andrew Brayshaw with the 2 votes and Luke Jackson with the 1 vote. So it's really hard to say if Fremantle are going to play Luke Jackson forward. He was very good in this game. He kicked 3 goals. He was good in the ruck when he went in there. So it's really hard to know if Fremantle can make him the forward that they want him to be as that secondary ruck. I don't know if it's going to be the case because we saw Sean Darcy when he was out for the few weeks that he was. Luke Jackson was really good in the ruck for Fremantle. But yeah, Luke Jackson did prove that he can play forward and he got 3 goals. He was big. And Caleb Sarong was very close to getting a vote here. But I did give it to Andrew Brayshaw as the 2 votes because he was just very good in the midfield for Fremantle, and I just saw him as their best midfielder. After that, we get to the game of the round, which was Collingwood versus Adelaide. Collingwood, really good in the first half. The Crows came right back in the third quarter to take the lead, and it almost looked like Collingwood may be up for a bit of a challenge here. They may be coming off a little bit sluggish off the bye. But Collingwood, once again, as they have shown for at least the last year and a half, that they can just claw back any margin and claw back any team. And led by basically Nick Dacos again, he got him home. And I am a little bit disappointed about the Crows because they kicked 8 goals in a row, had a pretty good lead. And to be fair, they only had a good quarter in the third quarter. They weren't that good for the rest of the game. So I think the Crows need to find some consistency, especially in games away from home, because we've seen this year that they have. I don't even know if they've lost a game at home this year, but they're not very good away. So they have to be careful of losing those games away from home. And the 3-2-1 votes, 3 votes went to Jordan Dawson, 2 votes to Nick Dacos, and the 1 vote to Taylor Walker. Jordan Dawson was massive in this game. 10 plus tackles, 30 plus disposals. It's a little bit disappointing as a Swan supporter seeing it, but it's also very good to see. And it also proves maybe a good decision for Matthew Nicks to pick him as the captain at the start of the year. He's leading from the front, and we've seen a lot of players in their careers when they get picked as captain, they just can't find that form when they take that big responsibility. But Jordan Dawson's taking it in spades, and he was massive in this game. Almost got his team over the line, and it was just, if it wasn't for the guy with 2 votes, Nick Dacos, he may well have got it. But Nick Dacos was massive again, and kicked a goal or 2 as well, playing really good in the midfield at the moment, Dacos, and I don't think I've seen any 19-year-old play as well as he has. He's in insane form, and he's arguably holding... I've been looking at the votes, and I've been tallying them up. I can't remember. I don't think he's in front, but he's definitely up there for Collingwood. And the 1 vote I gave to Taylor Walker, he got 5 goals in this game, and now he's leading the Coleman, which is really surprising, as we saw at the start of the year. Charlie Curnow and Jeremy Cameron were fighting it out, and everyone was saying, can they get to 100? And all of a sudden now, they've really petered out, and Taylor Walker's now got the Coleman medal almost at his grasp. They've got a couple of games for the rest of the season. They've also got West Coast again. They've got North Melbourne this week. He could get a couple of bags, Taylor Walker, and take the Coleman for himself. And it would be amazing for a player age 32, 33 plus for him to get the Coleman and really put a dampener on the... I think it would send a bit of a shock through the AFL as the tall forward brigade, because if he's at 34 or 35 getting the Coleman medal, I think it's a bit of a slap in the face to the rest of those big tall forwards. I do think that Oscar Allen and Nick Larkey are a little bit unlucky that they're playing for teams that aren't scoring as much, because those two are in the top 10 right now. I think they're in nearly top 5, and yeah, I think they actually would be giving it a real shake if they could just actually perform a little bit better as a team. But yeah, at the moment, Taylor Walker leading the Coleman, which I don't think anyone expected at the start of the year. And finally, we get to the Gold Coast versus Hawthorn, and Gold Coast had 31 scoring shots in this game. At home, needed to respond after a really poor game last week against Carlton. They did that in spades. It's great to see. Hawthorn, I don't think they're ever going to win this game, especially with the loss of James Sicily, their captain, for 2 or 3 weeks from now. So they were never going to hold up in defence, and I think it showed. The 3-2-1 votes, I gave Noah Anderson the 3 votes, Braden Fiorini with the 2, and the 1 vote to Blake Hardwick. Noah Anderson, he's been a little bit inconsistent at times this year. I don't think he's been as good as he was last year, to be fair. But I do think now he is also holding the responsibility because Toot Miller's not there. And a lot of games this year he has been well helped by Matt Rao. But today he took it... Well, sorry, not today. Yesterday he really took it on as the role as I need to take control here. We didn't play well last week as a senior player, really, of the club. And one of the best midfielders in the comp that I've got to take responsibility. And he did that really well, Noah Anderson. Braden Fiorini had played really well off the wing for the Gold Coast, and this guy has probably been known as like a real disposal getter. I know a lot of AFL fantasy players like him because he does get those disposals, but he's always been in and out of the team, probably for his defensive attributes. But as a wingman, he played really well in this game for the Gold Coast, and if he can hold that sort of form, he could definitely push this team a little bit higher up, I believe. I think the wingman is probably one of the most underrated positions in the game now. As we've seen, like Nick Martin with Essendon and Lockie Hunter and Langdon with Melbourne, the wingman can be one of the best attributes for a team. And if you have a good wingman, you can have a really good setup for your transition of football. So I think that if Braden Fiorini can lock down that role, the Gold Coast could definitely find some better avenues towards goal. And the 1 vote I gave to Blake Hardwick, who was very good for Hawthorn playing off halfback. I don't know why they played him forward. I don't know why they played him forward. He had a massive game with, I think, 35 plus touches, and yeah, he was just very good for Hawthorn. I don't think they need to chuck him forward ever again. I don't think that's the option for him. I don't think he can play that role. But there we go, guys. That is the review for round 15 and the votes. like I've said all along as well, I'll add this in like the clip for it as well. At the end of the season, I will be doing, or I think, me and my brother will do it. So he's been away the last few weeks, my brother, I'm sorry, but he's been at work, so he's got a real job. I have a real job as well, but I obviously can just come in my room and do it. He has to come all the way over here and do it. So yeah, he can't always do that, which is fair enough. And also, we've got to do this earlier in the week because it's like if we do it like on a Thursday, the new round's already started and no one gives a shit. So yeah, what we will be doing at the end of the year, we'll be doing like a votes tally, like obviously how the Brownlow is called, but a little bit more interesting because I'm not reading him like a patient who wears a helmet and drills into a cup. Like I don't know why they read it like that, but yeah, we'll be doing a votes and we'll see who can win the Riders medal, which is obviously way more important than the Brownlow. But anyway, let's get into this round, which is round 16. We're out of the byes now, back to the 9 games, and we start on Thursday night with Brisbane versus Richmond. Richmond are in some good form, but are they in good enough form to go up to Brisbane and beat the Lions is going to be the question. I don't think they will. I think Brisbane will win this one. And we've also seen teams off the bye come off quite sluggish, so that's why as well I'm picking Brisbane. But I do give Richmond a bit of a chance here because Richmond are in some really good form at the moment. Trent Cotchin's has found that form back from out of nowhere. We've seen Dustin Martin really lift in the last month or so. We've seen Shea Bolton lift. He's gone midfield. Taranto's in the best form of his career. I do give Richmond a bit of a chance here, but Brisbane at home, I can't pick against them. I think about 10 or 15 points. I think it's going to be a pretty close game, but I think Brisbane will win this one. After that, we get to Sydney versus Geelong at the SCG. And this is a really big game for both clubs, obviously. Another grand final rematch. We saw what happened last time to Sydney. They went down to Geelong and lost by nearly 100 points. It was probably the worst loss they've had outside of a grand final in a long time. It's going to be it's going to be interesting to see how Sydney play this game because they've come off such a soft win against West Coast, arguably had a week off, and Geelong had a hard-fought win against Melbourne. It's going to be interesting to see because Sydney are coming off a 6-day break as well, so I don't think that's going to have much of a factor because of how easy they won against West Coast. But when we've seen teams in the past have a really soft win, they can go to their next game coming off like not match hardened. And I think that is what's going to happen here. I think Sydney will play a lot better than what they did up in Geelong. And I think this may be a bit of a close one, maybe a 20 point game. But I am going to give it to Geelong in this one. I think Geelong may have found their form back. We obviously saw them lose against Port 2 weeks ago. But Melbourne, they finally found something. And if they can get that run towards the end of the year, they can make the top 8. And can give a bit of a rush towards that higher end of the 5th or 6th. And get that home final. Next, on Saturday afternoon, we get to the Crows versus North Melbourne at Adelaide Oval. This is going to be a soft win for the Crows. I think Taylor Walker could definitely take a bag here. I'm going to pick the Crows by 50-odd points. North Melbourne coming off the bye. They've been a little bit better in the past month or so, but I can't see them doing much here. And they're not very good over at Adelaide, so Crows win this one pretty easy. After that, we get to the Bulldogs versus Fremantle. Very big game for Fremantle. Well, very big game for both sides, but very big for Fremantle. Because like I said, if they can bank a couple of games outside of Perth, they can make finals. And the Bulldogs as well haven't been in that good a form. They beat North Melbourne in their last start, but they only beat them but they only beat them by a couple of goals. And the month before that, they were in some pretty poor form and were struggling to make the 8 at this stage. They're currently sitting 7th on the ladder, but they're only got a very low percentage. And teams like Geelong and now Sydney have a pretty good percentage to take over them, and even Richmond to a degree as well. So they need to win this game, Western Bulldogs. I'm going to be tipping the Bulldogs against the Fremantle Dockers purely because it's at Marvel Stadium. But Fremantle got a real chance here, and if they want to make finals this year, Fremantle, and give a little bit of a shake to the competition, they've got to win this game. After that, we go to Gold Coast versus Collingwood up at Heritage Bank Stadium. So this is one of the 2 times this year that Collingwood leaves Melbourne. Gold Coast is going to be interesting for them. They got a good win against Hawthorn, and they had a pretty good month until that game against... I've completely forgotten. Who did they play? Carlton. Sorry. Yeah, other than that game against Carlton, they've been pretty good since they're, just before the bye and coming off the bye. But it's Collingwood. I'm sorry. Collingwood are playing such good footy at the moment. Yes, they had a bit of a hiccup against Melbourne before their bye, but I do think that Collingwood are the best team in the comp at the moment, and I'm going to pick Collingwood in that one. Then we get up to Saturday night, Essendon versus Port Adelaide. Big game for Essendon. As we did the rest of the season predictions about a fortnight ago, I actually said that Essendon would miss the finals. But I also added as a caveat to that if Essendon can bank one of these wins in the next 6 weeks, they will make finals. Now, they lost their first one, their first challenge against Fremantle, and this is a big one against Port Adelaide because Port Adelaide, obviously one of the most informed teams in the comp at the moment, currently on an 11-game winning streak. I actually think that this is Essendon's best chance to beat them because coming off the bye, Port Adelaide have lost a bit of that momentum. They're not going hog wild every single week, winning every game. And this is at the MCG, and if you guys have seen, Port Adelaide don't have a very good record at the MCG. So I've actually tipped Essendon in an upset. Now, I'm not exactly confident, but I do give Essendon a big chance here because of this fact being at the MCG. If this is at Marvel Stadium, I'd be picking Port Adelaide because they've got a great record there. But Essendon, I think, can get a little bit on top, especially up forward with their tall forwards and Peter Wright. I don't think they have a match-up for them. And yeah, I give Essendon a real chance in this one. Next, we get to Sunday afternoon, early game, Hawthorn versus Carlton. Oh, this is such a tough one because Carlton, yes, got a win just before their bye, but they have not been in good form, and they beat Gold Coast on a really bad day for them. But on the other hand, Hawthorn are without their best player and probably the heartbeat of the whole club in James Sicily at the moment. So for that reason and that reason alone, I'm going to be picking Carlton. And they're not back by any means. I don't know why the media was like, oh, Carlton are back. They've won one game against the Gold Coast Suns by 60 points. They beat the Gold Coast, and no one expected them to. It would have been more. I think it would have been a little bit more shocking if the Gold Coast won that game. So for Carlton to win it, and yes, it was by 60 odd points. So it was a good win for Carlton, but they're in a hole as a club, and they can't just shy away from this if they can bank a couple of wins against the bottom teams in the comp. So Carlton will win this one, and I don't think it makes a difference. Next up, we get to Melbourne versus GWS. This is in Darwin, though, on a Sunday afternoon. So it will be pretty different conditions to what Melbourne are used to. But I do give the Melbourne a bit more of a chance here. GWS coming off their bye are going to be quite sluggish, I would assume. I just think Melbourne are going to be a little bit more sharper. And even though they don't have the best record up in Darwin, Melbourne, I do think that they'll beat the Giants. However, we have seen the Giants in the past month or so really shake up the competition with the fact that they've been able to beat a lot of the middle teams and the top teams. And I did mention previously as well, I think they're going to be one of those top killers like later in the season. They're really going to be a team that shapes the 8 because I don't think they're going to let many teams just walk over them throughout the rest of the season. So I do think that GWS can maybe cause something here, but I do think that Melbourne they should win this one. That's why I've tipped them. And finally, we get to West Coast versus St Kilda at Optus Stadium to round out round 16. And, I mean, what do you say? You pick St Kilda. You can't pick West Coast. This would actually be a real game if West Coast were in somewhat of a form that you'd maybe give them a bit of a chance here. But with how they're playing at the moment, a 50-point win, anything under 50 points for St Kilda result is basically a loss at this point. If you don't get a win by over 10 goals against West Coast now, you're basically throwing away percentage. You take this game by St Kilda, even if they take this game soft, they still win this one by 6 or 7 goals. But I think St Kilda will come to this game looking for blood. They came out and lost to Brisbane last week, so I think they're going to come in with a bit of fire in the belly. Want to get a good win. We've seen that St Kilda really don't get a lot of percentage boosting games, so I think this is a real one for Ross Lyon to, let the shackles go a little bit, let the team play a lot of fast footy, and just demolish West Coast. But yeah, guys, that's our tips for round 16. So now, to finish the podcast today, we're off to the AFL Fantasy, and this week I had a shocker, but it seems a lot of people didn't have that many issues, but for me, I had so many players out because of the bye. I had, how many people did I have out in the end? And this is after my trades too. I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I had 12, so I only had the 18 players, which means I had to play Lohman, Marek, who else did I have to play? Jasper Fletcher, Harrison for Collingwood as well. I had to play Sheldrick, but let's be honest, he was massive, so it didn't really matter for that. Yeah, I had a lot of players low, and I only scored 1,832. So my rank dropped really low. I'm down to 2,600, which is my lowest of the season, so I'm quite disappointed about that. But a couple of positives, I did bring in Jordan Dawson this week, and he was massive. He got 172. I should have put him as captain. I don't know why. He's been in such good form, but I did give it him a Zach Merritt, who got 109 as an in for my team this week, so I can't be too disappointed about that. Sheldrick, like I said, was massive in this one. He went up nearly 100k in price, so he's going to be good for later in the season if I want to get some another really big player. Had Errol Goulden score 145, was really happy with that. Ben Hobbs, I thought that maybe his output would be a little bit lower now because of Parrish's return, but he got 105, so he was really good as well. And Jack Steele, I was happy that he got 100, but I'm not going to be holding him for much longer. And yeah, Will Day was really good as well. I was actually playing against my brother Jack in my AFL Fantasy League, and if Will Day didn't have he was up, my brother was up by I think like 40 odd points in the last game. He had Matt Rowell, I had Will Day, and Matt Rowell, as you know, didn't have that very good game, but Will Day really stood up, and I actually got the win by 12 points, so I was pretty happy about that. But nonetheless, we get to the trades for this week. Now, my first trade was Will Ashcroft out. He's done really well this season as a rookie. You can't really blame him for that. But he has kind of bottomed out now. And I got Caleb Daniel. Last week I did say I was going to get Stephen Cornelio back. I'm actually going to do that next week. But I got Caleb Daniel because he's just in such good form at the moment. He's playing through the midfield for the Bulldogs. And I thought maybe that would change with Adam Treloar coming into the Bulldogs lineup against North Melbourne, as we saw. But it didn't really. It looked like Jackson McRae came in. So I'm going to be a little bit tentative on McRae at the moment. But Daniel looks like he's going to be playing through the midfield a lot. And he's been in some great form. So I got Caleb Daniel. And my little bit of a surprise trade, I got rid of Jack Zeeble. And I've picked up Harry Himmelberg. Now, the reason why I've done that is because, one, I needed the money from Ashcroft to get a really good player in the midfield, which was Taranto, who I put in there. And then I got Daniel back to forward line. But Himmelberg, since he's went to defence, has actually been averaging about 85. And I did need to make a cash grab here because I did need to make a couple more trades throughout the rest of this, like the next month or so. Well, maybe the next 2 or 3 weeks. I've got to get rid of Jack Steele. I've got to get rid of probably Harry Sheasel as well. And then I've also got to think about either Lockie Neal or Jack McRae as well. I've just got to think about those trades just in case they get a little bit wonky throughout the rest of the year. And also Briggs. I've been really impressed by how Kieran Briggs is playing. So that was obviously a real big risk picking up Briggs back when I did. And that's worked out immensely well, so I'm really happy with that. But I just don't know if he can hold his form. So I'm just a little bit tentative. So that's why I got a player who's like a point of difference, which was Harry Himmelberg. But since he has gone into defence, he's scored 91, 81, 84. And as we saw last season when he went to defence, he was really good back there. And I think that if he can score that like 90 points per game, 80 points per game, just for the next month or so, I can get rid of him maybe and then go a little bit higher. And that just gives me enough points because also all my reserves at the moment, other than Sheldrick, are at the point where they're not high enough to get rid of. And I'm obviously not going to get rid of Sheldrick because he's just going to skyrocket. So at the moment, I've got all my reserves like under 250 except for Harrison and Fletcher. And again, like them two, I'm not going to get rid of just yet because they've still got more money to generate. So I had to find a money generator somewhere, and that's why I got Harry Himmelberg there. I could have got Elliot Yeo. That's what my brother did this week. I just don't trust his body. I feel like he's going to get injured again. He is not proven to me that he's going to hold up in his body department. He may well do that, and I don't know. The thing is, they can't really drop anyone at West Coast because of all the injuries, so maybe I will consider that towards the end of the week. But for now, I think Himmelberg's a pretty safe bet. And then just for my captains this week, at the moment, I've got my vice captain on Tim Taranto playing on Thursday night. I think it's a pretty safe bet, as always. I mean, he hasn't scored under 100 this year. He's been in very good form since before the bye, so like a month or so. I think he was averaging 130 or something. I'll probably check that actually just quickly. He was averaging 135, so I think he's a pretty safe bet for a vice captain. And I don't know if Tim Taranto maybe pulls a knee or something. I've got my captain on Jordan Dawson against North Melbourne. I think he's going to have a massive day as well. And I think if North Melbourne do decide to tag, I don't think they'll go to Jordan Dawson. I mean, they may well do it. I just don't think they can. I think he's just such a good midfielder at the moment, and he's like those big bollocking midfielders who can still get locked down around the stoppages, but around the ground he's just going to be so much better. So yeah, guys, that's the Boundary Riders podcast for this week. Hopefully my brother Jackpot Junkies can be back for the next episode. If not, I'll just have to do a solo again. I will be doing the streams this week again. Sorry, the last few weeks I've been able to do one, but I've been just stuff going on. I don't know if I mentioned it here, but I'm actually getting married in a month's time? August. When's August? 2 months' time. So 2 months from the 26th. So yeah, I've just been planning a lot of that, and that's just taking up a lot of time. So I've not been able to stream or whatever, and but I will be doing at least one stream this week. Hopefully the Brisbane-Richmond game, maybe on the Thursday night. And I'd really love to do the Saturday either Twilight game, Gold Coast versus Collingwood, or Essendon versus Port Adelaide. But we'll play that one by ear. I'll at least do one stream this week, maybe two. But yeah, that's all from us today at the Boundary Riders podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying the channel as well, enjoying the videos. Make sure to leave a comment down below if you want anything more from us, or footy related, or anything. I've also been talking about what are we going to do off season for the AFL. We can obviously do trade period and draft stuff or whatever, but after that it's really what are we going to do for especially that 4 month period in between the AFL, probably that 4 month period after the trade period and all the movement stuff happens, and maybe the pre-season. So yeah, we'll have to find something out. If you guys have any ideas, let us know. And yeah, thanks for watching. But that's all from us. So good luck with your team this week, but we'll catch you all next time.